Imagine a world where death lurks around every corner, not as a monster or a storm, but as an invisible force that strikes with ruthless efficiency. It's 1347, and Europe teeters on the edge of an abyss, about to face its deadliest nightmare, the Black Death, a plague so unstoppable it wiped out 1/3 of the continent's population, would leave devastation and despair in its wake. With approximately 200 million lives lost, this wasn't just a disease, it was a turning point in history, reshaping society forever. But how did this catastrophe unfold? In the early 1340s, Europe was thriving. Trade routes crisscrossed the continent, cities flourished with wealth from silk, spices, and exotic goods, and life seemed prosperous. Merchants filled the streets, artisans crafted their wares, and bustling markets in cities like Florence and Paris stood as testaments to human ambition. But beneath this facade of prosperity, disaster was brewing. While Europe basked in its golden age, an unseen enemy lurked in the shadows. The Black Death, an unstoppable plague, had already ravaged parts of Asia and the Middle East, wiping out entire populations. To Europeans, this devastation felt like a distant tragedy, a far-off storm they believed would never reach their shores. Then, in 1347, the first signs of the coming nightmare appeared. Ships arriving in coastal cities like Messina carried not just their usual cargo of goods, but something far more sinister: death itself. The plague spread quickly, moving from town to town with terrifying speed. Rumors began to circulate of a mysterious illness sweeping through the ports. People fell sick overnight, their bodies covered in black swellings, and entire families perished within days. At first, many dismissed the reports as exaggerated, but fear soon took hold as the disease struck close to home. Communities that had thrived on trade and human interaction began to shut down. Neighbors no longer gathered in markets, and once lively streets fell eerily silent, gripped by uncertainty and dread. The arrival of the Black Death in the mid-14th century shattered the illusion of stability and security that once characterized Europe. Entire families and villages were wiped out within weeks, leaving streets littered with corpses as funeral rites ceased or became hastily performed rituals. The Great Famine of 1315 to 1317 had weakened the population, making them especially vulnerable to the deadly plague. Medieval doctors, equipped only with outdated theories about bad air and superstition, could not halt the devastation. Death spared no one, striking down both nobles and peasants alike, exposing the fragility of life in a world that had once seemed unshakable. As panic spread faster than the disease itself, the social fabric began to unravel. People fled in desperation, abandoning their homes, loved ones, and faith in established institutions. Religious leaders, once pillars of hope, succumbed to the same fate as their congregations, eroding trust in the church. The psychological toll was immense. Fear of death haunted daily life, and survivors grappled with a profound sense of helplessness. Communities were decimated, and in some places, no one remained to bury the dead. Cities, once bustling with life, turned into ghost towns. The scale of the demographic collapse was unimaginable, with an estimated 30% to 60% of Europe's population perishing. Entire villages vanished, fields went untended, and businesses shuttered as economic structures crumbled under the weight of the catastrophe. The sharp reduction in the workforce led to a scarcity of laborers, forcing landowners to offer higher wages and better conditions to the surviving peasants and workers. This marked the beginning of the decline of the feudal system. As the balance of power shifted in favor of the laborers, social mobility increased, and the rigid hierarchies of medieval society began to erode. Amid the chaos, religious disillusionment grew. Unable to offer any protection or explanation for the suffering, saw their authority diminish. Radical religious movements, such as the Flagellants, with people seeking salvation through extreme acts of penance. At the same time, anti-Semitism intensified. Jews were scapegoated, accused of poisoning wells and spreading the plague, which led to violent pogroms across Europe, further deepening the social divide and spreading fear. The Black Death left an indelible mark on European art and literature. Death became an obsession, reflected in the Danse Macabre, Dance of Death, a motif depicting skeletons leading the living in a macabre dance, symbolizing the inescapability of mortality. Themes of decay, despair, and the fleeting nature of life permeated the culture, reshaping European thought and philosophy for generations. Despite the immediate devastation, the Black Death also set the stage for long-term transformation. The economic opportunities that arose from labor shortages led to higher wages, better living conditions, and the gradual erosion of serfdom. Surviving populations, now with more access to wealth and resources, began to invest in education, science, and the arts, laying the groundwork for the Renaissance. The plague, while devastating, ultimately spurred a period of intellectual and cultural renewal that would redefine Europe's future. The recovery of Europe from the Black Death was a gradual and transformative process, emerging from the ashes of devastation that had claimed millions of lives. As the plague's grip finally loosened in the mid-14th century, surviving communities, once paralyzed by fear and loss, began to rebuild their lives amidst the ruins of abandoned villages and empty streets. Innovations in agriculture and a shift toward less labor-intensive farming practices marked the early stages of recovery. With labor in short supply, peasants wielded newfound power, demanding higher wages and better working conditions, which eroded the centuries-old feudal system. Over nearly 150 years, as trade routes reopened and bustling markets revived, society experienced profound changes. This period not only reshaped the economic landscape but also ignited a cultural renaissance, inspiring artists and thinkers to explore themes of existence, mortality, and human potential. Out of the darkness of despair, Europe began to rise anew, not merely as a shadow of its former self, but as a beacon of resilience and creativity, setting the stage for an era of unprecedented change.